your time.
Yeah, pleasure.
So hi, I'm Jesse Golub from Golub Tennis, and today I have the pleasure of talking to Alan Close. He's of MBX Mind Body Extra. He is a former tennis professional player and coach, an elite physical and mind trainer. So thank you very much, Alan, for coming on today. I greatly appreciate it. Today we're going to be discussing the mental game and mental toughness side of tennis for beginner tennis players.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to talk across the other side of the world. The time illusion has been exploded today. Here I am at 6 a.m. Melbourne, Australia time, and it must be, 2 p.m. your time or something yesterday?
At 2 p.m. Massachusetts, USA. You got it.
There you go. There you go. It's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah, thank you for that introduction. Yes, I've had a long career in tennis, such a long time ago. Did a lot of coaching, and now I deal with a lot of athletes in varying sports, and we're talking about the mental toughness of it, right from a beginner's level right through to the elite level. And there's always common denominators, and there's many of them, but the main one is that these elite performers develop a certain style of concentration, which is almost unusual. In terms of, it becomes so unusual that they become immersed in it. And it's a concentration which then, I call it absorption. They get absorbed into what they're doing and they actually become it. And then they rave about this mythical experience they call the zone, which is just effortless effort, and really sensational things happen. But there is, in the past, I've found it very hard to explain this, but because I've been doing this for such a long time, I realise we have to use the mind to get to a state where, well, actually there's no mind present, it's just actually happening. It hasn't gone anywhere, but it's not actually contemplating. It's not even, it is still concentrating, but it's not. You get into a state of high awareness, and this experience, which is truly intoxicating, can take over. Players that I admire in the past, such as Michael Jordan and these type of people from basketball, et cetera, they've raved about the experience and even actually written books with Phil Jackson called Sacred Hoops, which is actually talking about what you and I are talking about. So it's becoming more understood, but because we understand it, we think we can actually think our way in, and that's the trap.
Yeah. So in terms of the mental game, how much of it do you think it is for tennis? Like, how much of a mental game is it for tennis? Like, is it like a certain number you think? Like, people say, oh, 60-40, 70-30, or do you think it goes much more beyond that?
I think it's 100% mental game.
Mm-hmm.
You probably haven't heard that figure before, but if your mind goes unconscious, you won't be able to play. You'll be comatose, or you'll be having sleep and dreaming about it. So in reality, the game is 100% mental. But having said that, the mental part, as we get better and better, they call it the 10,000 hours principle, don't they? That after you've done, say, 10,000 hours practice, you don't need to think about step 1 to step 6, how to hit a forehand or how to change your grips or whatever. It's happening automatically. So the mind can get in the way then. Mm-hmm. And after the so-called mythical 10,000 hours, the mind doesn't need to be there. And then the concentration levels can increase to such an extent that you get this immersion into this state they call the zone. To answer your question, I think it's always a mental game, but the problem with the mental game is we can quickly go into contemplating about the mental game. And once we do, where we can't, I'm going to win, I'm going to lose. Once we go to contemplation, that's amazing, this contemplation thing, Jesse, because it's an amazing ability that we've got, but it's also a bit of a Pandora's box. It only is there, really, in my opinion, so that we can select something with which to concentrate on. It's not a constant. I mean, it goes over data, which is fantastic being a teacher. You've got to have this. But how about we select something out of the data to concentrate on?
Yeah, exactly.
And once we get to the... Yeah,
just picking one thing at a time and having a purposeful practice. And working on one single little thing at a time. And what you said about before about the thought process, and like I can relate to it. When I was really getting into college tennis, and that was my first time playing competitive, I remember when I was losing, I'm like, oh, my backhand stinks. And I would focus on my technique. rather than my opponent all coming at me. But when you're a winner and you have a lot of experience, again, those steps 1 through 6, you don't think about it, and then you really
That's right.
have tactical awareness.
That's certainly true. And all this contemplation that we're speaking about here into concentration is verified by our senses. So this, our senses such as sight, particularly sight and sound for tennis. When I was playing, I didn't realise at the time, but I seemed to have extremely good listening and hearing skills. So I could hear what the spin was, the direction of the ball hitting the racket, even the velocity, of course, and the direction. So I seemed to be reacting before I should have been reacting, and people thought I was fast because I was reacting early. In fact, I was actually quite slow. If you put me in a comparison off the court, I'd be coming last. But I seem to have this ability to concentrate at a level listening and hearing, which really gave me a bit of an edge. And people have this with sight too. I mean, I think of Federer, and I cannot believe when he actually lost a little bit of his edge, when Nadal shook his cage up a little bit, his head started to move a bit. I don't know whether you noticed that, but when he came back, his head stayed still right through to the follow through. It didn't move, eyes completely on the thing that should be happening, which is only the ball. Mm-hmm. But people actually tend to look up in golf. They look up in tennis. They're wondering what there's down the other end. They're wondering what's happening in the, in the stands, et cetera, et cetera. What's my coach going to think? And of course, that means that they're going into some contemplative process just from the senses. Mm-hmm. So to nail the senses, particularly from beginner level, let's say we've got a group of beginners, to teach them to actually simply watch the ball only is a huge thing, because they're looking at mum and dad watching them, or they're looking at whatever else, mm-hmm. and then they wonder why they miss hit. And once they start to miss hit, they're going to contemplate. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then they're in a bit of a cycle.
And outer environments and things like that. And just getting them to focus on the little fuzzy tennis ball and where they're not.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's an amazing sport. Tennis, went out of it for a long time, because in the end I sort of had so much that I had to go into other things. But it is a marvelous sport, and particularly to develop these things, Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about tennis, sorry about that, I've got a duck and it's a message on my phone. The interesting thing about tennis is that you haven't got time so much during the point to contemplate. Whereas in golf, you've got heaps.
That is true.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a bunch of beginner players that play different sports, and I was a baseball player, and I told them, listen, I love baseball, but if you make one mistake, it could mean the game. And tennis, you have like 500 balls to hit in the match. Make a mistake, it doesn't matter.
No, it's even good sometimes if you hit it off centre. In golf, if you hit the ball off centre, it could be the game, it could be the whole round. But in tennis, you hit it off centre, and then sometimes it's such a surprise to the other end, it's completely got them, you win the points. Because you don't know where it's gone, and they certainly know where it's gone as well. So tennis is a little bit more forgiving, but it's a much more physical game, and there's a whole lot of aspects to it, which is just a marvellous thing for young people in particular, or for anyone really.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And how do you think? How do tactics differ than strategy? Because I think a lot of beginner players, they get confused from those two words, and I think some coaches use it kind of interchangeably, so they get confused at a tactic versus a strategy. So if you can dive a little deep into that, so it's a little more clear for the audience, to be appreciated.
So I missed a bit of that. Just go. We're talking strategy.
Yeah, like what's the difference between tactics and strategy?
Very good. It's interesting, isn't it, when you look at tactics and strategy, because we hyphenate them. Mm-hmm. And I would think that tactics is part of your strategy, and strategy would be included in the tactics. So we can hyphenate them and look at a tactic, or we can have an overall strategy. But the point about that is, if we're having tactics and strategy, we're contemplating. Now you can do that changing ends, and you can certainly do it, between sets, et cetera, or prior to the match, and even after the match with your entourage, with your good people. Mm-hmm. But you can't actually use tactics and strategy actually as you're playing the point. So it's okay between points. It's okay changing ends. It's okay prior to the game, to the match. It's okay after, but not during the hitting of the ball. If we get into tactics and strategy in the middle of hitting a ball, you're going to have a miss hit. You might win the point with a miss hit, but that wasn't your tactic or strategy. So tactics and strategies have got their place, of course, but not during it. I speak about it. I've got a program which I call the blip of tennis, which is the zen of the very zenness, the deep concentration of it, and for sport and tennis. And I speak about when to have the contemplative process, when to start getting into light concentration, into very heavy concentration, and then when to let the concentration become so absorbing that you actually become the tennis playing. You actually become it. It's like, Jesse, listening to music. When you first listen, you start to think about it. You're contemplating, this is beautiful. But more and more you concentrate on it, the concentration gets so deep that you actually get swept away. It's got a symphony in every cell. You can feel it dancing inside you. That's what I can remember tennis when I was in the zone was like. It was like exactly like that. And it can be intoxicating.
So would it help to, when you're in the zone and to be that concentrated in terms of the strategy, what would you say would be helpful for players to know like kind of who they are and like their playing style? Meaning, for example, like being an aggressive, like overall an aggressive baseliner versus being like a serve volleyer or like a net rusher. Like, would that help with the overall just relaxation of their mind to know who they are, and then they can work on their similar like tactics, like the 2v1 patterns or maybe lob and drop shot, things like that.
Yes. So we're getting into areas now of, we're sort of thinking about, we're getting into areas of mind. What does mind do? And then we're getting into areas of what does the zone do? And the zone, we could actually sum it up and say awareness. Now, you'll be aware, you won't be thinking I'll play a drop shot, but you'll be aware a drop shot's on.
Sorry, drop shot what?
You'll be aware that a drop shot's available and a good ploy. But you won't be actually saying, will I or won't I? Yeah. So there's this little fine line there where we have awareness of while playing the point, and drop shot is apparent, but it's not logical and it's not an analysis. It's just awareness. And the awareness then enables you to use the trained skill. We spoke about the 10,000 hours prior. It enables you to use the 10,000 hours. You've probably practiced many, many drop shots in the same thing. Do you need to think, is this the time and place there? No, you don't. You're actually going to play it for win, whether you win or lose it is irrelevant. And even the score when we play is completely irrelevant. That's a big thing to say. We need to be aware of the score, but if we focus on the score and we like to win and we start to lose, we'll create a performance anxiety, guaranteed. Exactly. So do we need to give any energy to the score? No, it's going to happen regardless. It's something to be aware of, because then the strategies and the tactics that we spoke about from the coaches, et cetera, can come into play. We need to be aware of that. But do we need to give it total energy, the score? Most definitely not. We don't want to play under performance anxieties, because at least you're going to tighten up the end of your backswing just prior to going into your hitting zone, and the actual trajectory of the racket, because of that tension, just because of that, will change, and you'll, instead of hitting top spin, you'll hit flat and you hit the top of the net. You know what it's like.
Yep.
When I was playing, Jimmy Connors hit it so flat, missed the net by this much, and it landed inside the baseline like this, and all of a sudden his boat was rocked because the ball went up like this. This has been an amazing experience in my lifetime to see the change of styles.
Yeah, like I was just popping my head when you're talking about not really forcing the shot, but like seeing the overall geometry of the court and having that vision, and like working the tactics that you're practicing, and maybe that turns into maybe another pattern, but just seeing the whole court and seeing what's available to you and just going for it instead of thinking, oh, I have to go for a drop shot at this one specific time in the point. No, you see the whole court and you work on the tactics that are your strength and see what happens. I love the thought of putting less pressure on players mentally and just playing the whole court, playing your pattern, and see what happens.
You're actually in tennis. You've got another person at the other end, which is returning your shots. You can't do anything so much about the way they hit the ball and the way they think, but you can certainly do a lot on your side of the net. And on your side of the net, your attention should not be going into contemplating their side of the net. Your attention should not be going to that, because if it does, if it goes into contemplation, you're actually then going into that guy's moving much, or that lady's moving much better than what I am. So then you're starting to calculate. So something is going to give there in terms of the depth of focus that I'm speaking about. So let's keep our attention into awareness on our side of the net, but also let the awareness include, watching the cue off their racket up there, so that we can, like I did, get the sound of the ball, etc., etc. It's a matter of actually knowing when to actually be tabulating, be calculating, and be logical and have some analysis, and then it's over. Then how many times in practice over the years would you hit a drop shot in that spot? Literally thousands. I know when I was coaching, I'd hit hundreds and hundreds of balls on one shot for a player to actually perform that backspin, to spin the ball back toward the net and land it on that spot. But do they need to actually think about what I was coaching them in those times? No. They don't need to think about it. That's the time of being it. There's a difference between being something and thinking about it. Because when you think of something, Jesse, you can only think on what you thought on or what you want to think on.
So you're saying that, so for the audience, you're saying of thinking during a practice, but then just being in the moment during the match.
Yes, you can think about, even in practice, inside the white lines, you can actually think prior to hitting the ball, but as you're going through the practice session, you'll find that there's no anxiety about winning and losing, so the practice sessions proceed along quite well. But as soon as we get inside the white lines in a match, the mindset changes, because there's win-loss now involved, ranking points, etc., etc. So therefore, the practice form that we've practiced so much can be very lost, particularly in people who are wanting to get into the top ranking. You have a look at the top 50 compared to the top 10. Sometimes you look at them and you think the top 50 player is better than the top 10. You watch them in practice and you'll see it. Yep. It's amazing to see that person is a top 10 player, and then you get on to the match court and there's no similarity at all. So the idea is to be practicing when you're playing and playing when you're practicing.
Practicing while you're playing.
Yeah, practicing while you're playing and playing when you're practicing.
Yeah, it kind of goes into what Sterling Strother talks about a lot in terms of coaching our kids during practice. He needs to simulate the match atmosphere, or a little bit, at least more like it. Because if we're not doing that, if we're not practicing the way that we actually play, then there's a big gap in the match. Yeah.
Wow. So with you there, in what I'm doing with this stuff here, I'm actually encouraging coaches like yourself to create the conditions in the real world. So the conditions of the real world on the match court opposed to the practice court can be starkly different. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've got a whole lot of people that are, on your side when you're playing, but then in practice there's no one there but you and your coach side. So there's conditions, there's differences in noise. So we should try and emulate. But look, let's be honest. This atmosphere we talk about, in reality, it's only what we're perceiving it to be. We're perceiving there's an atmosphere in a match that's different to an atmosphere in practice. In fact, during the playing of the practice point or the match point, it's the same. It's only after each point is different and before each point is different. During the playing of the point, it should be no different at all, or the practice point. Here's where the problem is with people. They have a different mindset during practice as they do in actual matches. And then, you know as well as I do, I've coached a lot of beginners myself. I no longer coach, but we need to simplify what they need to concentrate on. Maybe if we I used to find this successful. Maybe if I gave them a starting point and an end point and they concentrate on that only, and don't even worry about hitting the ball, just get that as a 10,000 hour principle, and then actually say, okay, watch the ball. And that's interesting too, to watch the ball, because I'll put my fist up in front of me. If you look at me, you can see the fist representing the ball. So that's, you're looking at the background with there's the ball in your field of vision. But when you look at the ball like I am now, I can see you in the background. So to teach our beginners to do that is huge, because they're looking at the coach. I hope I'm doing this right. I hope I'm doing this right. And of course they miss it because they're not watching the ball. In fact, we're not encouraging them to watch the ball with the simplicity of where they start their swing and where they finish their swing. Then we can develop something. I can't believe that we haven't yet developed tennis players that have got a left and right hand serve.
Yeah, and that's something that's you'll see it online. There's a few coaches that are kind of experimenting with some of their players. I can never say the word dexterous. I think I just said it. And there's a few coaches out there that have their players right and left-handed, and I think there might be, I think there's one player in the tour, or I know there's a few college players. Then also there's the argument of teaching two-handed on the forehand and the backhand side. Bartoli, she did that French Open. I'm pretty sure she won the French. I think it was in 2008, 2009. I could be wrong. But just keeping things simple on the right and the left side of your body. It's an interesting conversation. That's for sure. And I actually had one more question. In terms of beginners, like visually and looking at a role model for their technique and how they play, footwork, things like that, I fell under kind of this spell as well. Like when I wanted to watch the pro players on YouTube, and that's how I learned in college a lot. I would watch highlights of pro players, and the more and more I've matured and gotten older, I'm coaching kids, I've realized that as an amateur tennis player, to get better and learn and watch a video, I think you really should be watching 4.0, 4.5, 5.0 USTA level amateur players play on YouTube and their full matches, not just the highlights, because then you see a realistic role model, see how they're playing, their technique, rather than watching highlights of the pro players. I think if you could watch the winners, then it's influencing you that to win a point, it's only hitting winners and not forcing your opponent to make an error. And I think that has a huge influence on a lot of players' mindsets.
I completely agree. The body is, and mind and body are tended to be hyphenated. I'd like to see where your mind is without your body, and vice versa. They're intimately connected. The mind is the soft version of the body, with the body the hardware of the harder version of the mind. The body makes no distinction about what's being imagined or visualized. It makes no distinction about what's being imagined or visualized between that or whether it's actually happening. It is reacting exactly the same. Proven by biofeedback. Biofeedback with Olympic athletes, if they visualize, the muscles are contracting according to the vision. That's why they do that before downhill skiing, say, or before 100 meters. So what you're saying is you're actually giving these players a vision of which they can remember, of which if they activate that vision, the body will react to it. It's the most amazing thing to think that we have nearly 150 billion neurons in our brains in a cylinder, a container, which is about 2% of our body weight. And the 2% of our body weight is called the brain. I know, it's astonishing, this. It's just incredibly beautiful. And at rest, this brain uses 30% of our total daily glycogen, our food energy. 30% at rest. If it's busy, it can use 50, 60, 75% of our total daily energy. It's been guesstimated, Jesse, couldn't be estimated, that the greatest minds in history, such as my hero Einstein, have only used, they say, 10% of that capability because we use habitual pathways. So that means we're using those continuous pathways, and there's all of this other brain neuronal networks just waiting to be filled with new visions. I mean, this is astronomical.
You said
Yet we don't.
You said new visions?
Yeah, new imaginations, new visions, what you said earlier, watching the top players, etc., etc. What could be better than that to fill their minds with a brilliant swing path and brilliant demeanour, and filling their minds with this, giving them, they just get really filled with it, and their body reacts to it. And then not only that, give them what I now call fictional imagination, first-time imagination about themselves. It's never even been here on the planet ever before. It's first time. It's like this. Imagine an apple, or visualize an apple, a red one. You've probably got it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is fictional imagination for you. It's first time. Imagine it at the same time as a banana. You've got that, haven't you?
I got it.
Okay, count up to 3. 1, 2, 3. See if you can remember that. Now you can visualize it. Mm-hmm. It won't be long before you clone it.
Yeah, okay, the more you visualize it and the more you're open, I think when you're open-minded too, and all of a sudden everything starts to click a little bit more and a little bit more. Yeah, I think a lot can be said about like the amount of screen time people are on now, and
yes,
and then that's replacing reading books, going for walks, or just playing practice matches, and
exactly.
All experiences could open up more visions, like you're saying, mentally.
Exactly.
Alan, I greatly appreciate our conversation today.
Pleasure.
I'm gonna have to end it. I'm a school teacher, and
no problems at all.
Pretty soon.
Let's keep contact as much as we can. I really like your style. I think you've really onto something here. Have a very happy Christmas if I don't speak to you before then, and New Year. And COVID will be gone before you know it.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Have a great day.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.